My name is Ruslin. I'm almost 60, and I live in Brighton Beach here in Brooklyn. I listen to your podcast a lot while I'm driving my cab, which is pretty much all I do now, day after day. It wasn't always like this. I immigrated to the United States in 1992, not long after my country vanished overnight. Before that, I was a forest ranger in central Russia, where Europe meets Asia in a place called Yugva. Yugva National Park stretches along the western slopes of Russia's Ural Mountains, about 1,600 kilometers east of Moscow. Up high there's tundra, lower down meadowland. More than half of it is boreal forest, pine and spruce, and it's enormous, nearly 19,000 square kilometers. For perspective, Kuwait is only about 17,000. Yugva is bigger than some countries because it's so remote, and because Moscow and St. Petersburg have parks that are far easier to reach. Yugva never saw much tourism, just a few thousand visitors a year. Back when I worked there, a lot of those visitors were families of Red Army soldiers stationed at nearby bases, and it was an encounter with one such soldier in 1987 that started everything I'm about to tell you. My official title was Lishnik, loosely, forester. We didn't have rangers. That always sounded like an American idea to me. Fancy titles to do ordinary work. Under socialism, we didn't need them. We were foresters, all of us. So that's what I answered to when I heard it barked at me down a trail one day. It was high summer, the busiest season. I was walking a woodland path when someone shouted from behind me, "You there, forester? Come here now." I turned and saw a man in civilian clothes, but the way he spoke told me exactly what he was: a Red Army officer. I'd served in the army myself, long enough to know officers tend to share one personality. My American neighbors have a word for it: jerk-offs. I like that word. It almost sounds Russian. He marched toward me, fast and furious. Behind him stood his family, his wife, and two small children, a boy and a girl. The officer looked ready to explode. His wife and kids looked shaken, like they'd stared straight into something they couldn't explain. When I asked what the problem was, he erupted. He said some strange man had been wandering the forest and had deliberately terrorized his wife and children during a picnic. I asked for a description. The officer said the man was tall, dressed in dark furs, and wearing a hat that looked like it had been made from a bear's head. At first, the man hadn't threatened them outright. He just watched from a distance. When the officer confronted him, the stranger chose a silent, staring contest. Then the officer took a few steps toward him, and the man in the bear head hat charged. The officer said his children screamed, and he thought he'd have to fight to protect them. But like the animal he wore, it was a false charge. The man stopped short, just close enough to break them, and then walked away laughing. After frightening the officer's wife so badly she was crying, to me it sounded like a hunter who'd had too much vodka. When I said so, the officer snapped that the man wasn't a hunter. He carried no weapon, just madness in his eyes. Then he gave me a deadline: find him fast. If the man wasn't apprehended by the end of the following week, would be hell to pay. Later that day, one of my fellow foresters and I started searching for this bear man. At headquarters, we had an old UAZ 469, nicknamed the Goat. Loud, terrible brakes, and if you rode in it too long, you'd feel it in your bones. Not the greatest of all time, like my friend's kid says about that Dagestani fighter, but the Goat was reliable, easy to fix, and when you have that much ground to cover, you love what keeps moving. Like the Huns loved their horses, we drove to the area the officer described and spent hours in the woods looking for tracks, campsites, butchered remains, anything. Illegal hunting was common, especially in autumn, when poorer families tried to fill their larders for the long winters I don't miss. Because the park is so vast, poachers sometimes lived off the land for days while tracking big animals. That kind of activity usually leaves obvious signs, but we found almost nothing. A few useless tracks that disappeared into streams or onto hard ground, and no trace of the bear man. With sunset coming, we called it for the day, but I believed the officer would cause trouble if we failed. So at dawn, we went back out. We pushed farther into the wilderness, following what we thought might be his trail, though we couldn't be sure. We crossed meadows and streams, eyes glued to the ground. We found animal tracks, droppings, nothing human. If the man had gone deeper into the park, we were headed the right way. That made the lack of evidence feel wrong, unsettling. After a while, my partner and I started thinking we were wasting our time. If there was no sign of him, we must be searching the wrong place. Then, just as we were about to turn back and return the Goat to HQ, we found the charms. I don't know if charms is the best word. In Russian, they're called ober trinkets meant to carry holy or spiritual power. Some are tied to the church, like lengths of blessed rope people sometimes put around dogs' necks. Others are tied to Zagavore, Slavic folk conjuring, and those aren't blessings. They're curses. The first one was hanging from a low branch, a small bird's skull fixed against a backboard of woven twigs. My partner pulled it down and looked at me. Under communism, things like that weren't exactly illegal, but belief in old superstitions could earn you psychiatric treatment, if you understand me. We didn't assume our bear man worshipped old gods. We took it as a message. He didn't respect us, and he didn't want us there. Now that we knew we were closer than we'd thought, we pushed on. Not far ahead, we found more objects hung and placed like warnings. Not all included bones, only the worst ones, but every single one marked the forest as his. We couldn't prove he'd made them, but the alternative, multiple people in furs, scattering curse charms through the woods, was too disturbing to seriously entertain. We returned to HQ and reported what we'd found. Our boss said he'd organize a wider search with a bigger team the next morning. At dawn, we went out again, splitting up to cover ground and using radios to stay in contact. It was a mistake. Mid-morning, one of our team walked through the area my partner and I had searched the day before. The ground gave way beneath him. Instinct saved him. He twisted as he fell and shoved himself away from the drop. He barely caught the edge, and hauled himself out with everything he had. When he stood up and looked back, he saw what he'd almost dropped into: a deep pit lined with sharpened stakes. 6 of them, each sharp enough to punch through a man's boot if he fell hard enough. He radioed it in, and we all rushed to his position. Only then did it sink in. This wasn't just a man marking territory. He meant to maim, maybe kill, anyone who chased him. We weren't armed, so we fell back to our headquarters, northern, central, southern, and waited for orders. We were furious, itching to find him and have the police drag him out of the woods. When the chance finally came, it came with good news. The next search, we'd be issued rifles loaned from the local Red Army militia, your Army reserves, more or less. We were also ordered to move in 2-man teams. We thought rifles and buddy pairs would keep us safe. We thought the sight of guns would scare the bear man off. We were wrong, completely wrong. A few hours into the search, one of the 2-man teams called over the radio, frantic and terrified. They said they were under attack from an unknown position. They couldn't see the attacker, but he could see them. They'd been forced to fall back quickly to avoid being wounded or killed. We hadn't heard gunfire, which made no sense if they were being shot at, but we knew their sector. We ran toward them with our rifles up. We expected shots as we approached. We heard none, only the pounding of boots and our coworkers yelling for help. When they saw us, they shouted that he was behind them. They begged us to fire into the brush because he was there, right there. We just couldn't see him. They weren't imagining things. Someone had attacked them. But from where we stood, it looked like they were fleeing ghosts. For a minute or two, they refused to leave cover, insisting arrows could come at any second. That's when we all said the same thing. Arrows. Are you sure? We didn't have to take their word for it. Retracing their steps, we found one of the arrows buried in a tree trunk. That ended forester patrols in that sector. Our boss wouldn't let us go back without a militia escort, the Soviet militarized police. They could bring Kalashnikovs and PKM machine guns, fully automatic, unlike the old SK rifles we carried, leftovers from the Great Patriotic War. A week later, once the militia had assembled, we guided roughly 24 of them into the bear man's territory. We swept the forest all day. With that many men, we covered much more ground, but no arrows flew, no bullets were fired, and we found no camp. We decided he must have moved on. It made sense. He'd seen us in his woods with rifles. If all he had was a bow, he'd been outgunned. Any sensible man would run while luck still held. But he hadn't moved on. He had simply decided to strike on his own terms. About a week after that sweep, 2 foresters in a northern sector cabin got a terrifying surprise in the middle of the night. Someone crept up and set the cabin on fire. One of the men was awake and heard glass smash against the wood outside. Then flames erupted. He lunged for the fire extinguisher. Those old Soviet military extinguishers were nearly useless. He couldn't stop it. Both men got out alive. The cabin didn't. That was the escalation that changed everything. We weren't hunting him anymore. He was hunting us. Our boss called the militia back, this time with more than twice the manpower. 24, but an entire company of militarized police sent to comb his territory. This time, he didn't just watch them march. He attacked. Around midday, chaos exploded when a militia officer screamed the man had been shot with an arrow. It punched through the meat of his shoulder without hitting anything vital, but the sound of his agony carried through the trees. Then came the gunfire. The men around him sprayed the woods in every direction, firing blindly into cover, hoping to hit whoever was hidden there. After the storm of gunfire, no more arrows came. A search turned up blood trails leading deeper into the forest. The militia put dogs on it. After hours pushing through thick woods, they found one of the bear man's living spaces, barely more than a dugout covered with pine branches. The blood trail had stopped long before, probably after he treated himself. The shelter showed clear signs someone lived there, but the bear man was gone. That final militia patrol ended our encounters with him. No more arrows. No more charms, at least not for a long time. We told ourselves he either died of his wounds or abandoned the area. Either way, the crisis had passed, one that could easily have cost one of us our life. We were relieved to return to ordinary work. Years passed. The Iron Curtain fell. Overnight, we discovered we barely had jobs to do anymore. Some men stayed, living off the land, and whatever the old money could still buy. But slowly, foresters left one by one, some for Moscow or Perm, others for foreign countries where they hoped to start over. I became one of the men who left Russia for good. While I was chasing a visa, packing, and saying goodbye to family, I kept wondering if I was making a mistake. Then, an old coworker, still in Yugva, told me something that settled it. During a routine tree count, they'd found another of the bear man's charms. This one looked brand new. I've never looked back, not because I don't miss Russia. Sometimes I miss it badly, but because I realized there was never just one wild man in furs wearing a bear's head, hoping to wound or kill foresters. There were more, maybe many more, and it felt like only a matter of time before the same bloody struggle started again. My name is Ian, and I'm a forester here in Romania. I live in a small village near the forest, and every morning I wake early, put on my uniform, and head out. My job is simple. Like my colleagues, I walk kilometers every day checking trees. We mark old or sick ones for legal cutting. We count saplings and plant new ones in spring. We also watch for bears and wolves or lins because they need to be monitored and counted too. But one of our most common jobs is stopping cars and trucks to check papers and look for illegal wood. Because our biggest problem, without question, is illegal logging. They mostly come at night with axes and chainsaws. They cut the best and oldest trees, beech, oak, spruce, and haul them out as fast as they can. You might think they can't take that many, but big gangs can drop 100 trees in a single night. They do it night after night. In a month, we can lose thousands upon thousands of healthy old-growth trees. Some foresters, the less reputable ones, take bribes. The rest of us get threatened with axes and chainsaws, and sometimes guns. We weren't even allowed to carry guns ourselves, until 2019, long after the events I'm about to describe had already unfolded. Illegal logging destroys more than trees. Without roots, soil washes away in rain. Rivers fill with mud, break their banks, and flood villages, ruining lives, sometimes permanently. The noise and violence drive animals away, or kill them when nests and dens collapse or get crushed. And I worry that if we lose these beautiful places, my children won't ever see the deep, old forest I knew when I was young. That thought breaks my heart, but it also hardens you, because fighting them costs more than time and effort. It costs blood. For a long time, we hid in the forest at night with notebooks and flashlights. If the logger group was big, we stayed hidden and counted numbers. If the group was small, we sometimes bluffed, making enough noise to convince them we had more men. They'd abandon the lumber, jump into trucks, and flee. But not always. Sometimes they attacked, charging with chainsaws screaming and axes raised. And I promise you, nothing makes your life flash before your eyes like a man sprinting at you with a revving chainsaw. We called police, but they were stationed far from the forest and almost always arrived too late. We did what we could. We tried to stop the logging and root out bribe takers among us. We tried hard, mostly without success. In the end, the government painted us all the same. One day, our boss summoned everyone to headquarters with an announcement. The local government was tired of the logging problem, and after hearing of a few isolated bribe cases, they decided we were all corrupt. Our protests meant nothing. The decision was already made. If we weren't going to stop it, then we'd pay for it. Thousands of leu would be taken from our collective paychecks every week. And the longer we failed, the longer the deductions would continue. We were furious. But we had only two choices: accept the punishment and lose money, or quit and risk not feeding our families. For younger foresters, it was a debate. For those of us with families, it was. We had to intensify the fight, no matter the physical or spiritual cost. At that stage, we still weren't permitted to carry guns, so we tried to scare loggers off. First, we used firecrackers, large, powerful ones we could launch through trees. They'd explode overhead and terrify men working in darkness. After a while, the loggers got used to them and kept cutting until we ran out. Then we tried dogs. The loggers called our bluff because we weren't willing to risk our loyal furred friends. We stopped bringing them. All the while, we begged the government to let us carry guns for defense. We kept hearing the same answer: "You're not soldiers. You're not police. It's too dangerous." Finally, we were told to focus on intel, collect evidence, and hand it to police so they could arrest loggers at home. It was slow, and as we kept losing money, we started taking more risks. For months, we fought a losing battle. Then one small victory lifted our spirits. Two foresters, Niku and Gavel, were on patrol at night and caught a group of loggers. There were many of them, and only two foresters. Normally, you observe, take notes, and back away. But Niku and Gabriel made a plan. At that time, if a lone forester confronted them, the loggers would simply chase him off with axes and chainsaws. So Niku turned on his flashlight, marched straight toward them, and started shouting. A few loggers stopped cutting and moved toward him, hurling curses, making a scene. Not all of them joined the chase. Enough stayed behind that no one noticed Gavel slip to their truck and stab holes in 3 of its 4 tires. No one saw him approach. No one saw him leave. The next morning, another pair of foresters found the truck abandoned, 3 tires flat. We were elated. We celebrated that abandoned truck like we'd won a battle in a real war. We sold the illegally harvested lumber to recoup losses and plant new trees. And we had a new tactic that worked. It didn't even last a month. A few weeks later, little Pavo was patrolling alone in a section we didn't think loggers would bother with. We were wrong. In the middle of the night, Pavel radioed in. He said the loggers were trying to outsmart us by cutting where we didn't expect them. He said there were a lot of them, 2 trucks worth. He needed backup, either to scare them off or distract them long enough for someone to get to the tires with a knife. Those of us on duty who could access a vehicle rushed toward Pavel. We were hopeful. We'd done it before. If we could get a man close to the trucks, we could stop them. As we drove, Pavel came back on the radio. The trucks were nearly loaded, he said. The loggers were preparing to leave. We told him not to do anything alone. After that, he stopped responding. The radio went dead, and panic spread through everyone who heard it. When I arrived, only my fellow foresters were there. The loggers were gone. So was Pavel. We searched the rest of the night, walking in pairs with flashlights, calling his name. We covered miles. When daylight came, he was found less than 100 yards from where we'd started. We all knew the moment the search ended, because a man screamed like his mind had split open. He'd found Pavel. They had chopped and sawed him to pieces. It was the worst thing I've ever seen. In my time as a forester, I'd witnessed grisly murders and terrible accidents. Not even the prostitute found broken in half and shoved into the cavity of a tree horrified me the way Pavel did. It crushed us. Many of us went to his funeral and tried to comfort his mother by telling her how brave he'd been. I won't say his sacrifice was worth it. We should have been armed long before Pavel died, but his death forced serious talks between our bosses and local politicians. They relented, and we were allowed to carry rifles. We're not permitted to fire unless directly threatened, but the sight of rifles was enough to push the loggers elsewhere. We put a brass plaque up at HQ to honor Pavel's sacrifice. New foresters see it and understand they're part of a generation allowed to defend themselves. The danger isn't gone, and illegal logging hasn't ended, but no one should ever suffer what poor Pavel did, dying to protect the forest from human greed. I've worked for the Forest Service for around 15 years, and the job comes with some unusual law enforcement problems. One of the biggest is illegal hunting. No matter how flexible we try to be, no matter how much warning we give, there are always people who think they're above the law, determined to bag a buck out of season. It's infuriating. If everyone hunted like that, there'd be fewer deer and fewer animals overall. It can drive populations into a spiral, and the the excuses they give you are unbelievable. One guy swore he thought it was still September. You'd have to be a fool to forget what month it is, and he'd have to think I was an even bigger fool to buy it. So yes, we take poaching seriously. When we get reports, we move. One day I got word that illegal hunting might have happened in a particular area, so I drove out to check. One technique we use is examining tree trunks. Fresh scars in bark, punctures hidden beneath new growth, even metal detected under the surface. There are many signs a rifle or shotgun was fired nearby. A bullet lodged at a certain height can show where a hunter stood and the direction the shot traveled. Repeated damage can mark a known poaching spot, and if the trajectory lines up with the habitat of a protected species, it can help build a case. Sometimes we use metal detectors to locate lead or steel under bark. In serious cases, we remove bullets for ballistics. A cartridge dug from a tree can link a scene to a firearm, just like in regular police work. Logging companies care too. When saws hit metal in wood, blades can be destroyed, and operators can be badly injured, even killed. Many reports come from sawmills that notice frequent metal strikes and alert authorities. Trees can be silent witnesses long after the shot. I grabbed a handheld metal detector from my truck and walked the area looking for signs. Sometimes buckshot marks can resemble deer antler scratches. Deer scrape velvet and mark territory, so you can scan a suspicious patch and get nothing. But after about half a mile, I found obvious shotgun damage on a tree, one of the clearest examples of buckshot impact I'd ever seen. I had no doubt what caused it. Then I ran the detector over it. Silence. That made no sense. Even the smartest poacher doesn't dig pellets out of trees. And visually, there seemed to be plenty buried in there, maybe even from multiple shots. I pulled out the small knife I carry and started peeling back bark around the damage. The tunneling was exactly what you'd expect from ballistic impact, but at the bottom of one tunnel, I didn't see dull metal. I saw an off-white clump, almost porcelain. I'd been with the Forest Service nearly 10 years by then, and I'd never seen anything like it. I carefully scraped away wood and worked the clump free. When it came out and I looked closely, I actually gasped and almost dropped it. It wasn't buckshot. It wasn't a bullet. It was a tooth. A human tooth, as far as I could tell. As a ranger, you learn to recognize teeth and bones from the animals in your park. Bird remains are easy. Deer teeth are flat. Carnivore teeth have distinct shapes. A front tooth like the one in my hand wasn't animal. It was human. We may be forest rangers, but we're still law enforcement with responsibilities like regular police. Once the shock passed, my first thought was evidence preservation. I went back to my truck, radioed in what I'd found, then returned and strung crime scene tape around surrounding trees. A coworker arrived within an hour. When I showed them the tooth, they admitted it scared them too. Most forest issues stay in-house. We handle them ourselves. But teeth lodged in a tree meant crime scene technicians, maybe even a forensic anthropologist. We didn't know the age of the teeth or how long they'd been embedded. took days to assemble a team. One morning at dawn, techs, forensic personnel, a photographer, everyone walked into the taped area. They photographed the tree, the ground, the positioning of the damage, and close-ups showing the teeth still lodged in the trunk. Only after that did they remove the rest, using tools meant to preserve trace DNA or residue. They also sampled the wood, because growth rates can help estimate how long the teeth had been there. My coworker and I stood there all morning, answering questions. The investigators wanted to know about unusual activity in recent weeks. We told them we hadn't seen anything. Then all we could do was wait for the lab. The big question was obvious. Whose teeth were they? First, the lab compared them against dental records in the National Missing Persons Registry. No match. Next came DNA testing, which we thought would hit something even without a direct match, because DNA can point to relatives too. Nothing. No matches at all. Whoever those teeth belonged to had no relatives in that system, living or dead. It's possible, but it added another unsettling layer. In the end, we never learned exactly how the teeth got into that tree. We were given theories. One theory, later ruled out, was from a coworker who wondered if it was a Native American burial site. So old a tree had grown up through remains and carried teeth into the trunk. Of course, we considered foul play. If a shotgun blast had shattered someone's mouth at close range, you'd expect metal fragments along with it. But there weren't any. As one coworker put it, it was almost like someone had loaded a shotgun shell with human teeth and fired it into the tree. That idea, unlikely as it was, scared the hell out of us. Our only real comfort was thinking the teeth might be old enough that whatever happened wasn't something recent we'd failed to stop. Then the lab report came back with the one thing that felt conclusive. The teeth had been embedded in the trunk for, at most, just over a year, and they belonged to a man in his 40s at the time of presumed death. That was hard to swallow, knowing I'd been working that year. The forest is huge. Our ranger team is basically a skeleton crew. We can't be everywhere at once. Still, it sat heavy. We never learned who he was, and no one could say for certain it was murder or some other nightmare explanation. I try not to dwell on it, because it made walking among those trees feel wrong. Even retired, I still think about those teeth sometimes, and wonder how they ended up buried deep inside that trunk. I've been a U.S. forest ranger for most of 3 decades. In that time, I've heard every tall tale hikers and campers can invent. More Bigfoot sightings than I can count, 20-some UFO encounters, and one guy who swore he saw Jimmy Hoffa, alive, hiding out in the Barrens in an RV. It isn't just reports. When people learn I'm a ranger, they ask if I've ever had strange encounters on duty. I get why they ask. It's more interesting than most questions I hear, but my answers usually disappoint. I've never seen an undocumented animal. I've never watched strange lights hovering in the sky, and the only hairy bipedal growling monsters I've seen stomping through the woods have been my coworkers on early mornings. The only thing that ever truly disturbed me doesn't even make a clean story. doesn't have a satisfying beginning, middle, or end. It was confusion, fear, and questions that never got answered. It started when a ranger named Ron went missing on patrol. It was a normal morning. Ron was doing a fire management inspection, checking for buildups of dead wood and dry needles, when he stopped responding to radio calls. Another ranger drove to his last known location and found Ron's truck abandoned, his radio sitting on the passenger seat. A quick search around the vehicle turned up nothing. By late evening, search and rescue was out there with dogs. It should have been simple. Let the dogs work. We assumed Ron was injured. There aren't many reasons a ranger just disappears like that. When we found him, it was worse. Ron was cold and looked like he was suffering an extreme allergic reaction. I had a cousin allergic to peanuts, and Ron looked and sounded exactly like my cousin did after accidentally eating peanut brittle one Halloween. But it wasn't just his face and neck that were swollen. His arms and hands were swollen too, deep pink. Skin stretched tight until it looked shiny. That same angry discoloration ran down to his fingertips, where the color turned so dark it was nearly black. We had a medic with us. She jumped in immediately, cleared his airway, started an IV, and an ATV with a transport cot arrived to get him back to headquarters. From there, he was airlifted to a hospital. By the time the helicopter lifted off, we were wrecked. We didn't know what had happened out there, what he'd done, what he'd touched. We only knew there was a good chance he wouldn't survive. The medics looked panicked. One of them told us bluntly it wasn't looking good. Back at HQ, one of the rangers, Susie, was in tears. We kept thinking about Ron's wife and kids and what they must be feeling. For days, we stayed in contact with the hospital, waiting for any change. Then, about 72 hours after admission, doctors said he'd stabilized and would most likely pull through. A few of us visited. His wife was in a chair by his bed. Seeing him awake and alert was emotional relief, gratitude, all of it. But the question hung in the room, huge and unavoidable. What happened? Ron couldn't really remember. He recalled walking his route, scanning for fire hazards, when he noticed what looked like a piece of black volcanic rock on the ground. It seemed out of place in a forest without major deposits like that. Thinking a hiker had dropped it, he picked it up. At first, it felt normal light, like volcanic rocks often do. But as he walked, it began to feel warm in his hands. That's one of the last clear things he remembered. He dropped it, knowing whatever was happening probably wasn't good. He remembered looking down at it on the ground, and then his memory turned hazy. He remembered swelling. He remembered struggling to breathe. After that, darkness. Then he woke in a hospital bed with tubes in him. After a couple of their agents spoke with him, Ron directed the EPA to the area he'd been patrolling. They sent people to find the rock. At first, the doctors feared radiation exposure, acute radiation sickness. They ruled that out quickly with the tools they had. But that still left too many possibilities. They tried everything. They could reduce how severe Ron's condition was, but they couldn't fully stop it. Then, Around hour 60, he began to stabilize on his own. His prognosis improved sharply. By the time we visited, doctors had ruled out a classic allergic reaction too. So everything hinged on recovering that rock. This is where it got strange. The EPA couldn't find it. They searched the grid Ron described, and it wasn't a guess. We had digital records of where he'd been headed. They combed the undergrowth for hours, painstakingly. Nothing. They didn't want a toxic or hazardous substance lying around for someone else to pick up. So they worked like their lives depended on it. But the rock was gone. That scared us more than we wanted to admit. Something like that in a public forest could be a real threat. We warned visitors not to pick up strange rocks and to report anything unusual to the Forest Service office. We dreaded the idea of a curious hiker or a child doing what Ron did, but nothing else happened. It was as if that warm black rock had vanished from the face of the earth. Without it, we never learned what happened to Ron. He recovered, but he never returned to work. He took a job with his brother, doing home renovations. The money was good, but Ron loved being a ranger. Something out there must have scared him badly to walk away from the job entirely. It doesn't keep me up at night. It's long in the past. Still, every so often, I catch myself wondering what the hell he found. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Hit the notification so you don't miss future narrations. I drop new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9:00 p.m. EST. And there are live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. If you've got a story, send it to my email, horrorstory13a@gmail.com, link down below. You might hear it featured in the next video. And if you want to support me further, you can get early access to future narrations and bonus content on Patreon. Or hit the big join button to learn about members-only perks. Also check out the Let's Read podcast for these stories and big compilations anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I've got a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. Links are in the description. Thanks again, friends. And remember, Skibidity Riz, Ohio. The Zonler hitting the gritty, drinking the grimace shake.